this program, which is on planning for delivery of instruction, and you will all agree with me that planning precedes any effective implementation. Whether we take a small decision in the at home or at workplace, if that is preceded by a good planning, then there are chances that we'll meet success. And for instruction, which involves human interaction and also aims at enabling the learners to acquire certain capabilities so that they become competent for the world of work or the life in general, it becomes rather important that we do planning for instruction. Many a times, as teachers, we take it easy and we only refresh our content which we are going to deliver in the class. But if systematic instructional plan is developed, then there are chances that our instruction will be effective. So, in that light, a number of steps need to be undertaken. When we are talking in terms of planning for instruction, it is that we need to carry out the analysis of our learners, that is, who are the people who are actually going to be there in the class, whether it is theory or a lab or a workshop class. What are their uh, characteristics, maybe physical, social, cognitive, emotional characteristics, and understanding of the learner is very important. Then, at the same time, we try to break down the topic, if it is a theory class, and find out how logically the topic need to be sequenced. And then the third step, this can be interchanged. The third step is to state the learning outcomes. Earlier, we used the word intended learning outcomes in the form of instructional objectives. But when outcome based education has been introduced in the technical education system, and if we go by Spede, who has worked in the area of outcome based education, then he tries to state that learning outcomes can be written at varied level. It is not only that we can write learning outcomes at the program level and then at the course level, but he also speaks of that when you talk in terms of the course, then course does not consist of what it consists of, especially it consists of topics. And if you break down the topics, then topic is broken into lessons. One particular topic may have 3 to 4 lessons, or one topic may have 10 lessons. So when we break down the topic into lessons, the planning actually starts with specifying or stating the learning outcomes at the lesson level. So in this session, I'm going to focus on the writing learning outcomes at the lesson level. And what I have said is easily understood that any program which is offered by the technical institution, whether it is civil, electrical, mechanical, 4 years program or 3 years diploma program, actually consists of courses. And courses consists of, if you take a particular course, it consists of number of topics, and topics are further broken down into lesson. So program outcomes are written in the curriculum document, and course outcomes are also provided in the curriculum document. The teacher who's going to implement the curriculum needs to state the lesson level outcomes. So, in this session, we are going to focus on what are these lesson level outcomes, what is the concept of learning outcomes, what are the characteristics of learning outcomes, and do we write learning outcomes in one cognitive domain, or are there other domains of learning outcomes, and what exactly go into the three different domains of learning outcomes. And then we'll be also looking at some of the examples at varied levels in the cognitive domain. So to begin with, when I say outcome, so the ultimate purpose of teaching a particular course is to enable the students or the learners to acquire certain capabilities. Or, in other words, one can say teaching is always yielding to learning. And if there is no learning on the part of the learner, then we can say that teaching has not taken place. So, teaching and learning is something like selling and buying. If you sell, there is somebody who's buying it. If there is a buyer, only then selling will take place. And in this context, when we say what a student is expected to learn, any any content of any course if you pick up, then three important aspects come to your mind. Any competent person would have technical knowledge related to that subject. Then the person would have the technical skills. And in addition to that, certain favorable attitudes are required. Attitudes, you can also talk in terms of employability skills, entrepreneurial skills, and then in addition to that, one can include the soft skills which are expected of any person at the workplace. And if you try to break down the technical knowledge component, then what is it that is included in any course is part of verbal information. So the subject or the course consists of large number of pieces of factual information. Now, when you say factual informations and labels, all the names of the machinery, tools, equipment is nothing but part of factual information and labels. When you say there are two types of foundations, soil foundations, the deep and shallow foundation, it is nothing but a factual information. When you talk, there are two types of petrol engines, there are two types of fuels on the basis of which you can classify the engines. So you can say petrol engine and diesel engine is nothing but a factual piece of information. Then you can also see that when we say verbal information, that means when we orally or organized body of knowledge of this factual information, that is referred to as verbal information. Then there are intellectual skills which are acquired by the learners. And these intellectual skills include the concept learning, the principle learning, and the problem solving. Now, when I say concept, now here when I uh, say foundation, it is also concept. When you say uh, the concepts are like, you talk in terms of freedom, you talk in terms of independence, you talk in terms of force, you talk in terms of mass acceleration, you talk in terms of software engineering, you talk of stack, you talk of array. These are nothing but all examples of concepts. And in any course, there are two types of concepts which a learner learns. And these include abstract concept and the concrete concepts. Now, when I say concrete, that means that concept has a tangible referent. You can pinpoint that concept. Now, when you say AC machine, even you can point, or you say voltmeter, you can pinpoint that concept. Or when you say um, all the concrete, when you talk a table, chair, vernier caliper, all these are like you can pinpoint these concepts. These are concrete concepts. Or you talk in terms of the computer and you say this is a keyboard. So, keyboard is a concept which is again there is a referent. Or you say it's a monitor. Monitor is which you can pinpoint. Likewise, there are a number of concrete concepts in various subjects or courses. Then there are abstract concepts. Abstract concept is which requires a definition. So when we talk in terms of software, you need to define what a software is, what a hardware is, and then there are examples which you give to the learners. Or you talk in terms of magnetic force, or you talk in terms of force, it is a defined concept, right? Then there are principles, and principle is nothing but relationship between two or more than two concepts. Now, when you say Newton's law of motion, these are nothing but rules. When you talk about Joule's law, Ohm's law, Charles' law, these are principles and they indicate relationship between two or more than two concepts. And then finally, the highest level of intellectual skills which a learner acquires is problem solving, which requires application of more than two rules in a given situation to find solution to problem. And problem solving would involve the analysis, the evaluation, as well as then the creation of the solution of the problem. Then there are psychomotor skills related to a particular course which are required by the person. Now, when you say skills, so you have in mechanical, civil, electrical, a large number of practical components which enable the persons to acquire psychomotor skills. Then comes the attitudes and behavior. Now, let's see, if a person has to learn all this, then the learning outcomes will also pertain to a knowledge component, then skill component, and then the attitudinal component. So, in nutshell, when we say learning outcomes, these are simply the statements. When I say statements, these are statements regarding what a student will be able to do at the end of a unit of instruction. Now, here, because I'm not, when I say unit of instruction, then unit of instruction, you can take it as a program, you can consider it as a course, you can consider it as a unit, you can consider it as a topic, you can take it as a lesson. So learning outcomes, that what a student, say for example, I'm going to teach the research methodology course to my students, then what is it that is expected of them at the end of the course? That becomes a course outcome. And we all know that research methodology includes number of topics. Maybe the very first topic is introduction to research. So when I say I'm going to teach this particular topic, this topic may be divided into number of lessons. And at the end of a particular lesson, if it is the very first topic, what is it that I expect from my learner? That can he define its research? Can he classify research on the basis of methods? Can he classify the research on the basis of purpose? Can he be able to uh, explain the process of research? So if I am going to state these in a statement form, then they become the learning outcomes. That means at the end of a particular lesson, what a student will be able to do, that refers to lesson level learning outcome. And here you can see randomly from the different disciplines. Now, say define efficiency, maybe very technical terminology, define programming, compare diesel engine with petrol engine, differentiate between deep and shallow foundation, differentiate between stack and array, identify the mistakes written in the program written in C++, write a program in C++, design a staircase, and you can see I go on giving you examples. Now, when you look at this, at the end of unit of instruction, a student will be able to define, compare, differentiate, identify, write, design. What is the commonality among these examples? Mr. Balasubramaniam, if you can answer this, you are writing. So, what, according to you, is the common skill?
Learning.
Learning to higher learning outcome, but the examples, the way they have been written, don't you think what we said that learning outcomes are written in the statement form? So all these are written in the statement form. This is one commonality among them. All these learning outcomes are stated in terms of the learner's behavior. This particular behavior is to be shown. Who has to define programming or efficiency? Who has to compare or differentiate is none other than learner. Then you can see that when I say define, compare, differentiate, identify, write, or design, all these are action verbs. So the learning outcomes, they start with an action verb, or as we say in English, the activity verb. That is the commonality among all these examples. And when you say these are action verbs, this behavior is observable. Now, why? Because when I say the student will be able to define efficiency or define programming, I can check this behavior by asking the student, posing a oral question or giving a question where he tries to give me in writing the answer to that question. So either orally or in written form, the student can show this or demonstrate this particular behavior. This behavior, when demonstrated, becomes observable because we can compare the definition with the standard definition of the term efficiency or the programming. So we can say that learning outcomes, they have five major characteristics. That is, they are very specific. Now, when you say specific, when I say define, it means I am interested in that student will be able to give me the standard definition of the term efficiency or programming. And this specific is indicated in terms of action verb. If I say explain, then the meaning changes. Explanation means that a student will be able to write in his own words the meaning which he has understood of the concept of programming. So I'm not interested in any standard definition, but how a student is able to put that definition in his own words and give me example for that. So when you say write, write is again a specific behavior that is expected of the learner. This behavior, because it is observable, thus it becomes measurable. You can compare with the standard definition or you can compare with the standard interpretation and then you can give marks. So it is something which is measurable. These learning outcomes are achievable. These are realistic. I'll take both these, realistic as well as achievable. They relate to the context and they are achievable. That means these are to be attained by the learners. And within the specific time which is available, these can be attained. So the acronym SMART stands for the characteristics of learning outcome. Any learning outcome which is stated at the lesson level needs to adhere to these five. That needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time framed. Now, here, when you look at the example which I have given you, say if I had written understand programming. Now, this understand programming is a journalized term, because the definition or the meaning of understanding can vary from one individual to another. But when you write these action verbs, these becomes very specific, and these are uh, which you can measure because they are observable. So SMART is the acronym for the characteristics of learning outcome. Now, in the very first slide, we have seen that a student or a learner needs to have technical knowledge, technical skills, and attitudes and behavior. So, the learning outcomes also fall in three different domains. First is the cognitive domain, second is the psychomotor domain, and the third one is the affective domain. Now, when I say cognitive, anything which has to do with acquisition of information and the knowledge comes under cognitive domain. That means any learning outcome which is related to acquisition of knowledge by the learner, it comes, or which involves the use of cognitive processes to process the information, that comes under cognitive domain. Psychomotor, you can see it consists of two terms, psyche and motor. Psyche refers to cognition, motor refers to muscular coordination. So any course which you are teaching has, if technical skills involved. Now, if you say for example mechanical, yeah, the person needs to know the operation of a lathe. When you talk in terms of, say, electrical engineer, maybe he needs to have the skill in soldering, welding, etc., etc. Or when you talk in terms of psychomotor skills, the person need to verify the laws in the laboratory. So maybe verify Ohm's law, Charles' law, Joule's law, Newton's law, etc., etc. Psychomotor. Or if you're talking in terms of psychomotor, civil engineering, maybe the student needs to prepare a cement of a given ratio, or maybe he has to prepare a piece of concrete of a given specification, etc. Then effective. Effective means refers to attitudes and behavior. So any learning outcome that relates to acquisition of the favorable attitude and behaviors, or the soft skills, or the entrepreneurial skills, that come under the effective domain. So first we'll take up the cognitive domain. Now look at the screen which is visible to you, and there are certain things written here. So think of the cognitive process you use to learn name of a machine, symbol of hydrogen, value of pi, formally to calculate area, definition of force, names of various parts of computers, statement of rules, or listing or stating advantages and disadvantages of metals and non-metal. What do you think? What kind of cognitive process a person would require if he has to name, if he has to remember this, if he has to learn the symbols? Sorry, आपने नेम करना है किसी कंपोनेंट को, मशीन को, टूल को नेम करना है, or you have to give the definition of certain technical term, or you need to state a principle, or you need to give a formula for calculating certain parameter. What kind of cognitive process would be used by the learner, or what we normally use?
Are there are there so many ways to remember a name? For your
So
question, I
you
asked
have
a
said,
question. Are
you
there
have already
are
given me
there
the
so many
answer.
ways?
No, you have already
Yeah,
given
are
me
there?
the that means name needs
Yeah,
to be remembered,
uh,
memorized, right? It requires
yeah.
rote memorization because it involves.
Memorization only. Yeah, yeah. And we have
So
to meet the
the,
person repeatedly. It's not that
yeah,
memorizing alone. We have to
if
meet the
a
person
person has
repeatedly.
to,
At least,
Then, okay, so the person is
then
repeating
interaction,
because he needs to
some kind of
remember.
interaction,
Okay,
some kind of interaction,
okay,
then automatically we'll remember. That is, we have to first memorize
okay.
and then meet the
So
person
that
repeatedly.
means,
Then we should have some interaction. Then only we
just a
will
minute,
remember
just a
the name.
minute, just a minute,
Maybe for
just
years.
a minute.
Maybe
How
for years.
you
Yeah.
are going one step further. I said if a person has to, one thing is if you keep on meeting the person, the name will stick to your mind. But if you are meeting the person and you want to remember his name, you will either write in the diary and look at it maybe 2 days, 3 days, 4 days time, or maybe you repeat that name number of times in your mind and you are able to remember. Likewise, symbol of hydrogen, there's nothing to be understood initially. Now, this is initial learning to take place, and it involves rote memorization of the things because it doesn't involve any understanding. So, the very first level of learning or writing outcomes in the cognitive domain is the level of remembering. Now, just see the next one. Think of the cognitive process used to learn derivations, chemical equations, chemical reactions, concepts, procedures for writing a program, interpreting a graph, or even a theory.
No, ma'am, we have to apply it practically also.
अप्लाई तो बाद में आएगा, अप्लाई करने से पहले क्या होगा? मैंने सिर्फ डेफिनेशन को रट्टा लगा लिया तो कैन आई अप्लाई?
No,
नहीं.
understanding the
ओके,
definition is also
ओके,
important.
तो अब आ गए हो आप आंसर पे, that all these things require understanding on the part of an individual. Understanding means that the person knows the definition, he can now interpret those terms, concepts in his own words. He can give examples of those concepts, or he can explain theories, models in his own words, or even the process of writing a program or procedure which is adopted. He can explain in detail the procedure for writing a program and writing a process, or he can explain the process of manufacturing certain component. So, understanding is the next higher level of writing learning outcomes. Now, look at this, the third component. When would you say a person has learned a rule? Now, here I'm only putting rules, but it can be a concept or a theory because he has understood now, and the answer you have given me applying.
Madam, for example, traffic rules. Let us take rules.
Huh,
It cannot be memorized, madam. The traffic rules,
huh,
the signs and all, it cannot be memorized at all. Unless
fine.
a person drives and, then only he can keep everything in
Okay.
memory. Without
So that means when he starts
signs and
applying
all,
the
it's not
rules,
possible.
then we
So
say the
experience,
person has
then
learned.
experience, then here experience is required.
Oh, okay. For application, the practice is needed, but it is the cognitive process is applying a rule. So when you are driving, you are following the rule, and then you are, we'll say that you have learned the rules. Then, okay, go next. See the examples here. Identify the cognitive capabilities needed to do the following. Identify causes for failure of a given lathe machine. Explain the reasons of cracks in a given building. Locate the fault in a program written in C++. Identify the strengths and weaknesses in the organizational structure of three companies. Identify the reasons for low motivation of faculty in an organization. किसी की गलतियां निकालते हैं तो क्या करते हैं?
Analyze, ma'am. Analyze.
Analyze. Thank you very much. So, absolutely right. So, next higher level of capability or the cognitive processes that are used are analyzing. And look at now this. It is already the answer is given. In any course, you will, wherever there are two materials which can be used, two principles which can be applied in a given situation, two kind of processes which can be used, two theories which are applicable. A person needs to make a choice or a selection. Thus, if a student is able to select an engine for a given multi-utility vehicle or select the type of reinforcement for the given bridge, determine the feasibility of implementing national education policy recommendations in higher educational institutions, or evaluate the adequacy of resources for implementing the given curricula in your institution, the cognitive process that is used is evaluating. And evaluating involves determining the worth and taking a decision. And this is what exactly is contained in the learning outcomes examples written here. Then the next is identify the cognitive capability needed to do the following. Write a program in C++ to meet the customer needs. Create a local area network in a given institution. Design a carburetor for a given vehicle. Design a component of a given machine. Design an electric car or design a smart city, or evolve 5-year policy for the institute development, or evolve strategies to improve or enhance the effectiveness of communication in the organization. Over to the audience. What kind of cognitive capability is needed by the learner? Okay, go ahead. क्या है? राइट करना है, क्रिएट करना है, डिजाइन करना है, इवॉल्व करना है, फॉर्मुलेट करना है. तो what kind of cognitive capability would be needed? Yes? Creating, absolutely. So, in other words, we say that learning outcomes in the cognitive domain can be written at 6 different levels: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Now, here you see this taxonomy is a revised taxonomy given by Anderson and Krathwohl. Bloom has given us these 6 levels: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation in 1956. But this came in 2001. And here you can see the difference that this terminology used nouns, this terminology used the verbs: remembering, understanding, applying. These are all verbs which have been used in specifying the learning outcomes. Another difference you can see is that the level 5 synthesis, which was primarily including those educational objectives which aimed at creating something, writing an essay, writing or evolving strategies or formulating plans. The Bloom kept it at number 5, but Anderson has changed it to level 6. According to them, the creation involves evaluation also. Because if you need to create something new, then you are determining the worth of the present things which are available, maybe the concepts, the models, the processes, procedures, the alternatives, and then you take a decision after evaluating the worth of or determining the worth of those things. So this change has been. Now look at, these are the verbs which can be used to write learning outcomes at various levels. So remembering. Now you see define, state, label, name, give, write, identify, enlist, or list. These are some of the verbs which can be used to write learning outcomes at remembering level. If you look at the understanding, the verbs change their nature. Now, here you find explain, differentiate, distinguish, give, interpret, project, or estimate, or calculate, or find. If a simple formula is to be applied, and missing parameter is to be found. Say force, mass, and acceleration are given, and you change the value of mass and acceleration and ask the student to do the practice force they have to. It is only understanding which is used. Applying, find, calculate, demonstrate, determine. These are some of the verbs, or apply. When you say apply law, Newton's second law of motion, and calculate this, it is nothing but applying, right? Problem solving includes analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So when you say identify, locate, what is this? Or explain the reasons, then these are at analyzing level. When you say judge, evaluate, appraise, determine the relevant, determine the efficiency, determine the effectiveness, these are nothing but at evaluating level. Then for writing at the creating level, the verbs which can be used include design, write, create, formulate, evolve. These are some of the example verbs which can be used to write learning outcomes at the creating level. Any doubt up to this point? Yes, over to the members. Any anything you would like to add to, or any question you have in mind? Let me just give you an example from the, say, this is a part of your curriculum, introduction to the system. So one can write learning outcome, say at the end of unit of instruction, a student will be able to explain system, differentiate between open and closed system, distinguish between static and dynamic system, give example of open and closed system, and give example of static and dynamic system. This is example from DC machines. So at the end of unit of instruction, student will be able to label the parts of DC machine, which is at remembering level, explain the functions of various parts, which is at understanding level, write winding scheme is again at understanding level, explain the characteristics of different types of DC machine is again at understanding level, explain methods for speed control of DC machine again at understanding. Apply would be if the person is able to control the speed of a given DC machine to the required level, will be application of the. Then explain the effect of armature reaction in DC machine, again at understanding. Define, again at remembering level. Describe at understanding level. List is again at the remembering level. Now, this is from electronics, if there are members. So multi-stage amplifier, so you can see explain is understanding, enlist various types is remembering level, differentiate is at understanding, explain gain is at the understanding level, state the uses is again at the remembering level. Let me give you one example from the research methodology, which maybe you'll be able to understand better. So when we talk in terms of, say, research methodology is a course, right? So selecting and defining a research problem is one of the topics in the course. So when we say select and define a research problem, then you see here, identify a significant problem for research. Identify a significant problem for research. At which level?
Analyzing.
Analyzing है या वो क्या कर रहा है? Whatever process he has learned, he is applying to identify a significant problem. So it is at the application level. Select a variable, again is at the application, because selecting and defining a research problem means whatever theoretical concepts is learned, how to identify a problem and how to identify the variable, he is now applying in real work situation and trying to identify the problem. and define the research problem. Then state the research objectives. Again, is applying how research objectives are written. He is now applying that knowledge and writing the research objective. And he is also applying when he is formulating the hypothesis for the study. Now go to say sampling. Identify the target population as application. Identify the accessible population as again application. Determining the size of the sample is application. Select the appropriate sampling technique. Now, at which level is this learning outcome? Doesn't it involve evaluation? Because if you know there are a number of sampling techniques, so whether simple random sampling is applicable in the given situation, or stratified random sampling is applicable, or whether cluster sampling is applicable, or purposive or quota sampling, non-probability sampling me. So he is now making a comparison among the techniques based upon the definition of the population he has selected for the study. So it is at the evaluating level. Select sample for various studies using different sampling technique is simple application of the technique in the real world situation. Now, here you can see that a person is analyzing the data. Analyze the data to test the research hypothesis. So, what is involved? At which level is the learning outcome? Is simply applying the statistical techniques to analyze the data, interpret the findings. Interpretation is at which level? Interpret the findings is the understanding level. Draw conclusions is at which level? At the understanding level. So when you now the same thing which I have given you can also be stated. You can see examples here, but I'll not go to these minute details here. So the only thing I would emphasize here is that whatever topic you are going to take up, you need to first write down what is it that a student will be able to do on completion of that particular topic. And this will help you in selecting the appropriate instructional strategies and assessment strategies. Now, if I say, if you have seen this, and my objective is not if I'm writing at this level, say the person would be able to select and define a research problem. Now, this clearly speaks of that I'm not interested in that student is able to explain the process of selecting and defining a research problem. I'm not interested in that he gives me in writing what are the steps involved in selecting and defining a research problem, but I'm interested in that he is able to go to the community or read the literature, identify the gaps, and then he tries to identify a significant problem for research. So, your methodology of teaching would vary. If you are simply interested in that student is able to explain the process of selecting and defining a research problem, giving a lecture is good enough to teach that process. But if I am interested in that he identifies a significant problem, the first thing I have to do is that I demonstrate them by taking a hypothetical or a real world problem, how to identify, how to observe, how to identify or establish a need, how to identify a significant problem, and then identify the potential factors that affect the problem, then how to retain the relevant factors, and then how to formulate the statement of the problem. So, the strategy one. Another could be that I ask the students and form small groups and give them a questionnaire and ask them to go to the community and interact with the community to identify some of the problems which they face in their day to day life. And then, while they come back to the class, they collate the information and then they identify a significant problem. So, providing them a real world experience, the first hands on experience by sending them to community or industry, or maybe I ask my students to interview a few persons from the industry who belong to a particular, say, total quality control. So quality control, I want them to find out how the quality is being controlled in that particular unit. So the students interview a few persons and then come out with what are the, how that is being done. So they come out with what are the problems faced by them in the management of the quality in that particular organization. So they identify a significant problem after interacting with the people who are working in that particular unit in a given industry. So provide them hands-on experience in identifying a significant problem. So otherwise, a lecture would simply do if I'm interested that they acquire the knowledge. Then the lecture, if it is accompanied, must be full of examples of good problem statement and bad problems to statement, and they need to be enabled to differentiate between what is that constitute a good problem statement and a bad problem statement. How to write, so a lot of practice is needed in enabling the students to write the objectives, hypotheses, and that maybe you can take hypothetical examples, or if they have identified a problem, writing the objectives and hypotheses after the review for that particular statement. So providing them hands-on experience. So your strategy depends, and likewise your assessment strategy will be determined by the learning outcome you have formulated. Maybe theory paper is not good enough for research methodology, so maybe they need to submit a project at the end which they have carried out during the semester, and the students are evaluated on the basis of that research project, having a viva and a research report, the basis for evaluating student performance, right? Now, the another thing which we need to understand is the second part, that is the, yeah, the learning outcomes can also be in the psychomotor domain. Now, when I say psychomotor, I have already explained anything which has to do with acquisition of technical skills and involves cognition and muscular coordination, that falls under the psychomotor domain. And learning a skill passes through 5 different stages. The first one is the imitation, second is the manipulation, third is precision, fourth is articulation, and fifth one is naturalization. Now, the very first stage, when we say imitation, what is done is a teacher or an expert tries to demonstrate a skill which is complex. A simple skill may not require any demonstration but requires step by step guideline provided to the learner. And a complex skill learning would require a demonstration by the expert, and that may be teacher in our case, and he gives the demonstration and the student simply imitates the experts. Then a stage comes in where a learner, a novice, is allowed to handle the machinery and equipment on his own. So, what happens when the student is allowed to handle the machinery and equipment on his own? He commits number of mistakes. Now, just giving you an example of driving a car, and when you are asked to depress, वो गलती से एक्सलरेट हो जाती है कार, वो कहता है लेफ्ट टर्न करो तो राइट टर्न हो जाता है, गियर बदलो, गियर बदला नहीं जाता. तो नंबर ऑफ मिस्टेक्स आर कमिटेड बाय द novice, and with practice the accuracy creeps in the acts. अब चाबी लगानी आ गई है, गियर बदलना आ गया है, ब्रेक लगानी आ गई है, स्पीड बढ़ानी आ गई है, लेफ्ट राइट टर्न लेना आ गया है, बट स्टिल द कोऑर्डिनेशन इज अ प्रॉब्लम. So with still more practice, the coordination comes in. As learner, a novice can perform the complete skill in a coordinated manner. So galtiyan kam ho gayi hain, coordination. Now what happens? A person sitting next to you in a car, you are able to talk to that person, but you are able to manipulate your machinery equipment. तो वो कौन सी स्टेज आ गई है? Articulation आ गई है. Then naturalization is where the skill becomes the second habit and you are able to modify, adapt the skill. अब देखिए, the person who has learned to drive in plain areas, maybe he's able to drive in hilly areas. Driving a car in empty road on empty roads easy है, but crowded जगह पे drive करना would be where you have mastered the skill. Now you are able to drive anywhere, whether it is an empty road or whether it is a broken road or whether it's a crowded road. You are able to do that, and you are able to also, देखिए, the people who go for designing hybrid cars, they have actually mastered the skills, and only then they are able to produce a hybrid car or a hybrid motorcycle. They are able to prepare, naturalize. Who is a person who can design a new mobile phone? Is a person who has actually mastered the skill of assembling a mobile phone. He can go and create something new. So psychomotor domain includes all that is concerned with acquisition of psychomotor skills. And here you can say, when somebody is being taken to the laboratory to verify laws, determine friction loss in flow through pipe, or calibrate venturi meter, or operate a lathe machine, or for a particular job, somebody has to set a job on the lathe machine. That is nothing, or drill 2 centimeter hole in a wall, or make a lap joint, or weld any two metal pieces, or so on. This is nothing but all part of your psychomotor domain. So whatever goes on in the laboratories, in the workshop is part of your, and here you can see, when I try to break down the verification of Ohm's law steps into the various steps. So what are all the steps which a student needs to take? And I write, draw the circuit diagram, arrange the apparatus, clean the ends, make the connections as per circuit diagram, determine the zero error and least count, adjust the rheostat to pass a low current, and repeat this process thrice or 5 times, is nothing which would lead to verification of Ohm's law. Likewise, Joule's law, you can see, or say, for example, if somebody has to wire a plug, then whatever the major duties the person has to the task which he has to perform, if you go on breaking down and write them starting with action verb, is nothing but you are writing the learning outcomes for various things. This is an example for computer, connect a computer in local area network. So steps to be taken at the administrator end, steps to be taken at the client computer. If you just jot down these are nothing but learning outcomes for accomplishing a particular task of creating a local area network among the computers, right? The third component is your effective domain. And when we say learning outcomes in the effective domain, so all learning outcomes that relate to attitudes, behaviors, values, entrepreneurial skills, or soft skills, they fall in this particular domain. Just giving you one example here, just have a look at, each one of us as a teacher would like our students to obey the rules, obey the rules of classroom, obey the rules of laboratory, obey the rules of submission of assignments, obey the examination rules, etc., etc. So many rules are there. Observe safety precautions in the labs, or in the workshop or while performing in the field. They are being taken for the field work, so they observe the safety precautions. Attend classes regularly, maintain punctuality, cooperate with others, communicate in large group, communicate in small groups, communicate one to one, communicate orally, communicate in writing, or write a research, ये आपका communicate ये in small groups one to one, ये क्या है? All these are nothing but learning outcomes in affective domain. And if you have analyzed, these remain common. These will not vary from, say, lesson to lesson, but some of these things are common among various things. But when you say safety precautions may be applicable in lab, workshop, or in the field work, which is more important, it maybe not be applicable in theory classes. Cooperate with others wherever you give group work, or you make teams for carrying out a particular work, so you would expect that a person is able to cooperate with others. Communication, even if you do for group discussion, you are organizing, you are having a seminar strategy, you are actually trying to attain this learning outcome, that they are able to communicate, not in large groups, maybe sometimes in small groups, maybe one to one. When you use strategies like active learning strategies, again then think pure sure, so it is again you are improving their communication, you are improving their learning to learn, you are improving their independent thinking, and also at the same time social learning you are improving. So these remain. Honesty is applicable throughout, respect others is applicable, maintain cordial relation is applicable throughout. So here you can see one example, maybe I would like to give you, that when we talk of learning outcomes in the affective domain, they pass through five different stages, especially with respect to the values. Now, when you say receiving, is the initial stage where we keep on getting do's and don'ts from the teachers, from the seniors, from the family, from the society, and we keep on accepting every do's and just keep on receiving without reacting to those things. And this is what happens when a student is taken. You can also relate it to lab, where you give do's and don'ts in the laboratory. The student keep on receiving the information at the initial stage, whatever do's and don'ts you are giving them. Then a stage comes when the learner starts responding to those do's and don'ts. Some he doesn't question, the other he starts questioning. Now, say for example, as we were told in our childhood, don't talk to stranger. Now the question comes, why shouldn't I talk to stranger? Go to bed early. Why should I go to bed early? I can be awake up to 2 p.m. Now the things have changed. So, responding, the person starts responding or reacting to certain do's and no. When you take the students to the lab, ask them to draw a circuit diagram. They say, can't I start without preparing a circuit diagram? Can I start connecting and building the connection and start the experimentation without drawing? So that is nothing but the person starts responding. When the person say, can't I do this instead of this, is responding to, valuing. We attach value to number of things. We value cooperation, we value honesty, we value integrity, we value money, we value relationship, etc., etc., etc. Now, thousand things may be valued by an individual, but the question comes that this value, the we attach certain value to certain things. Whenever we have to make a choice between the two, then comes the organization. Now, say for example, I'm traveling with somebody, or somebody is traveling with somebody, meets with an accident, and if the person speaks truth, the person driving the vehicle will go to jail. If he lies, he can save the person who was driving. Now, how the person would behave would depend upon what priority he accords to the relationship, or what priority he accords to speaking truth. So, if speaking truth is number one, then he'll speak the truth, the consequences may be any. But if he gives more weightage to the relationship, then he would certainly tell a lie and save the person. So, organization means according or fixing priority, whether you will give more priority to relationship or money or honesty or time, etc., etc. So, the order in which you give priority is the organization. Characterization by value set means the person personifies that value. As we normally says Mahatma Gandhi, ahimsa, non-violence. When we talk in terms social work, we normally take Mother Teresa, but other people are doing. But these were, they never compromised on these values. So this is the epitome that the person personifies that the value. So when you look at all these are effective domain examples of behavior. And if you try to analyze the program objectives which are there, you will see that leaving aside the first five, the remaining seven pertains to the attitudes, behavior, and values, where you talk of the sustainability issues, the societal issues, environmental issues. You talk in terms of team building, you talk in terms of communication, you talk in terms of learning to learn skills, you talk in terms of the project management, which will also have a component of the affective domain. So, soft skills all become part of your project management. So, friends, in the end, I would say that learning outcomes are going to benefit you as well as your learners. If you want to monitor your progress, because we are talking in terms of planning for instruction, so you need to write down the learning outcomes for the topic you are going to teach in the class. Before the class, you have to prepare, and then accordingly it will help you in, while you are in the class, it will help you in monitoring your progress as well as the learner's progress. That means if I have 45 minutes, I have written three learning outcomes which need to be attained by the learners by the end of the class, how much they have learned, and do I need to give more time to ensure the acquisition of that capability by the learners, or can I proceed with the next one? You can monitor your progress depending upon how many learning outcomes you have specified, how many of them have been attained by your learners. So, learners can also monitor their progress if learning outcomes for topics they have written and provided to them, that this is what they need to demonstrate at the end of the unit of instruction. Then these learning outcomes also help the learners to organize the study material. So they are using reference material. So if you say the very first one was define efficiency, now while they are reading the material, anything which is related to the definition will go under that learning outcome. They can organize definition hai, concept hai, examples hai, then you are going to the types and so on. So accordingly, it will help them to organize the study material if they're referring to the reference material. And while in the class, they'll be able to take notes under those specific subheads. So that is going to help them in organizing their learning materials. Then, as a teacher, it helps me in selecting the appropriate instructional method. Now, if I am interested in that they apply, then it requires practice, it requires hands on experience, it requires project work, it may require problem learning, etc., rather than, or it may require a demonstration by the teacher of the procedure that needs to be followed, and then the students may follow the procedure. So if it is going to be pure say problem solving I want to develop among them, so I need to demonstrate how to solve complex unstructured problems and then provide them real world problems to them so that they can acquire problem solving ability. Then media, what kind of instructional media would be required by the teacher is even determined by the learning outcome. So you, today we have technology and we can animate, simulate so many things, bring the real world into the classroom, and you can use your virtual reality, etc., by bringing the industry even into the classroom. So think of that, if you have the learning outcomes where you're dealing with processes, you can have an industry and you can provide a virtual learning experience to your learning by bringing that process into your classroom. Then so your learning outcome will determine what kind of media. Definition only text would do, right? So maybe a PowerPoint where you have given the definition of it. But if it is examples, so I can have the visual graphics also and give them the examples where that concept is being applicable in the real world and so on. Determine the appropriate ways to evaluate. So learning outcomes will help, as I have given you example, that research methodology, when we take into account, if it is simply defining, classify, explain the classification, it's all theoretical. So if my is selecting a problem, then selecting the research design and describing the procedure, collecting the data and writing a research report, then the evaluation should also be based upon the research report and the viva voce which may be carried out by the teacher. So if you are talking in terms of like evaluating, so learning outcomes where you are only giving practice, maybe those methods can be used for formative assessment of your student performance rather than summative assessment. Summative assessment will be based on research report, but quizzes, class tests, they may be theoretical, which may be used for formative assessment of the learners. So, learning outcomes need to be stated by each one of us when we are going to plan for our instruction. In addition to that, learning outcomes are also written in the readiness objectives. If you remember, when we used to plan for our instruction, what a student has already learned, if you have, whether he has the prerequisite knowledge, skills and attitudes that is required to learn this particular topic. So in terms of readiness objectives, which are intended learning outcomes of the previous learning, you can also state that in your instructional plan what they need to have the knowledge, skills before learning this particular topic. You can write down that. So, from my side, it is all about the learning outcome.